Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first of our newly started Carbon Black office hours. Our speaker this morning is Cory Fanion, who is a Product Value Engineer. I think most of you are familiar with the format. Oh, by the way, I'm Elizabeth Schulteis. I'm in product marketing, and I'm very happy to be able to be bringing these back to you again. The way that we'll go through this today is that Cory has about 20 minutes worth of slides that he's going through. Rather than interrupt him while he's giving his presentation, please put your questions in chat. And then we have a good half hour after Cory wraps up for dialogue and Q&A. We'll be getting started in just a minute. And also just wanted to let you know that, yes, you will be receiving this afterwards. Okay. And I am going to turn it over to Cory to get started now.
All right. As Elizabeth said, my name is Cory Engineering team, and I wanted to go through what I call the order of operations, which is my ordered process for whenever you're following what to do about it. So first, we wanted to start out with a question for everybody, and just a real simple, straightforward one: responsible for the blocks in your environment. I'll give everyone a second to answer that.
And it looks as though the answers are yes, overwhelming.
Perfect.
Your audience is responsible for eliminating blocks in their environment.
All right, so we're going to throw up the next question for you guys. What's your currently most used approval mechanism out of the four main ones? Hash approvals, policy permission rules, certificate approvals, or are you utilizing IT tools?
It looks as though you've got a large quantity, 57% use hash approvals, 33% use policy rules, and 10% use certificate approvals.
We got nobody on the IT tools, which
I don't see anybody.
Nope. So I hope by the end of this call that you guys all walk away with a better understanding of at least IT tools, if not all of the approval mechanisms. So we'll actually jump into the content now. So on the agenda today, first we'll take a look at their file reputations and why this is important with our product. And then we'll take a look at why files get blocked. This is really more around the more common reason files get blocked, and then the general idea behind what to do if it's not the common reason. Then we'll actually deep dive into the approval mechanisms and discuss when to use them and how to use them. And at the end, we'll have a couple links for some documents that will help to go back and reference to look at for this, as well as a PDF version of this presentation. This originally started out as a PDF document, was just converted to a presentation. So you will have a link to that original document at the end. Let's go ahead and jump to the next page. So file reputations. There are 11 reputations within the product that our sensor looks at, and this is the order of the importance of them. The highest level reputation is ignore. That is only provided by us at Carbon Black to our own files at Carbon Black. This is not a reputation that you can utilize within the product. You practically will never see it besides for our own files. The next highest reputation, which is where your hash approvals come in, is your company allowed list. Any hash manually added to the company allowed list will receive this reputation. And as you can see, as where it sits on the chart, it is rather high up. In fact, it is the highest reputation that you as a user of the product can provide to something. So that is something to keep in mind when you move into hash approvals. Next on the list is company banned. So this is the opposite of company allowed, anything added to the company banned list. Next up, we have trusted white, which is provided by our sensor by the built-in scanners in the cloud reputation system. Up next, known malware. This is also provided along with suspect and adware. After that, after those three malicious reputations, we have the local white and the common white reputations. Common white is also provided by our center. Local white, however, is the one that I would like to see our customers use more and more of when applicable. So local white is provided via three different methods. When you first install a sensor, we do a one-time background scan. That background scan is going through your inventory of files to look for anything that is known malware, and it will mark it as such. Anything that is not found to be known malware will receive this local white reputation. You can also provide it to files via their certificate or IT tools. Again, we'll get into IT tools nice and deep, especially since I know no one's really utilizing them. Local white reputation's my preferred reputation and what we intend you to use for most of your files, as it is not very high up the priority list. It is high enough up the list that it should get past most blocks in your environment. We'll discuss that in a little, but it is not so high up that we're ignoring what the file does. If a file that has a local white reputation suddenly starts to do something malicious, we still have the 7, 6, and 5 reputations to assign that file and then take action on it based on that. So local white is what you should be aiming to provide most of your files to get them running in your environment. It is not so high up the list that it can do anything at once, but it's high up enough that it should be able to run. The not listed and unknown reputations are our problem childs. These are what causes most of our blocks. Anytime a file gets dropped, you get the unknown reputation. And if it does not come back from the scanner as not previously seen, we'll get not listed or adaptive whitelist. So that summarizes the reputations. We will jump forward to why files get blocked. So in most environments, especially the customers that I tend to work with, we see, and this is especially true for new environments, most blocks in the environment are a result of that unknown or not listed or adaptive white reputation, the default reputation that files get. By default, the standard policy has a few rules that will cause these files to get blocked from time to time. Scraping memory is a big one. Running another unknown app is another one that tends to cause a good amount of blocks. So when you're faced with this, you're going to be on the alerts page and you're going to pull up the alert details for the block that you're having. And you're going to specifically look at two different things. Typically, the reason field will spell it out for you in plain text as to why it was blocked. In this case, in my example posted below, we can see it invoked another application. And there's a policy rule that if an unknown app invokes another unknown app, we will policy deny. And that's what we can see exactly happened here. So not all blocks are caused by this. You will see other reasons. The product is not only blocked because of unknown reputation. So you are looking at that reason field, and then you're also looking at the techniques field, which you can see in the bottom right of the screenshot. This is where our TTPs will be assigned. These TTPs can usually be correlated back to either a policy rule or a policy configuration that is causing the block. So then you can trace down why and work around how to approve that file to get past that block. With that said, we'll jump into the next page. So we're going to start off with what I consider the lowest level of approval. They're kind of equal, but basically my preferred approach first, and that would be certificate approvals. They're incredibly easy to leverage. You know exactly what you're approving. Typically, the publisher will sign a few of the files in your environment at least, and any file, again, that has a certificate approval will receive that local white reputation. There are two ways to utilize this. The method that I prefer is on either the alert details or the event details page. Under the signature, as you can see in the screenshot here, you'll have a nice easy button to click add. This will add that exact certificate to your certificate approvals list without you entering in anything. This is my preferred method. The other method is you can manually add these certificates yourself under the reputations page. You have to mark who they're signed by, their certificate authority, and if you want to do any questions. I personally do not prefer this approach. This leaves room for error, spelling errors specifically, or missing comma, which is always common. So I tend to push all my customers into using that add button. It removes any chance of error. Next up, we have IT tools, which is definitely going to be one of the confusing area of the product. So I will try to take my time explaining this. I do encourage questions. As Elizabeth said, we have plenty of time at the end to discuss this. Whenever I'm on an engagement with the customer, I really urge you to ask questions around this if you have any uncertainties, because it is a very important area of the product to leverage, but it is not the most straightforward if you just look at it. So with IT tools, the biggest caveat behind them is that the IT tool that you list, so in my example right here, we have trustedinstaller.exe. The IT tool that you list receives zero approval itself. IT tools is not to approve the file that you are listing. It is intended to improve the child processes and the child files dropped by that process or that executable. So my example, we have c:/temp/trustedinstaller.exe. So we know this file lives in the temp directory. With IT tools, you want to list the full executable in the path. We do support wildcards, but we ask that you be specific as possible. You don't want to throw a double trailing wildcard in this. When you list this path, for my example, we have trustedinstaller.exe. Again, we're not providing any reputation or any approval to trustedinstaller.exe itself. What we are doing is any file that gets dropped by trusted installer will then receive the local white reputation. And if there's a checkbox option to include all child processes. So if that process then spins up any processes, they will receive that local white reputation and it will continue down the chain. This is really useful for software for updater software is typically what I see. A file that drops a bunch of small files, typically in a temp directory, they run quickly and then delete and disappear. Default policies tend to cause some issues with that process because they're such short-lived files and typically it's an unknown invoking another unknown. That's where IT tools comes in. So to back up a step, give you another example. If we were to try to run an installer in your environment and that installer gets blocked immediately, you double click the file, nothing launches, that is not the time for IT tools. That is not going to get that file to run. But if you were to double click that file, it runs, and halfway through the install process, something gets blocked. That is a prime example for IT tools. And I do want to specify it is not limited to just installers. This can be used in any shape or format. It's just typically installers are where we see this behavior, that it is most useful. I do have customers that use it in a large variety of formats. They have software that can leverage this that's constantly dropping new files. IT tools is the answer for them. So again, just to reiterate one last time, because it tends to be the most confusing aspect to it. We provide no reputation and no approval to the tool that you list itself. This is intended for the child processes and child files only. With that said, we'll go ahead and jump to the next slide. We have our next two approvals. So my third recommended approval is to use hash approval. And the reason for this is that you are providing it the highest level of reputation in the environment, but you're not turning our sensor off. You're giving it the highest reputation. You're telling the sensor this can do what it wants, but we're still watching that file. It's not completely ignoring it. Where when you do a policy permission rule, depending how you configure it, and what I see in most environments is everyone tends to jump immediately to the full bypass, is to start with the hash approvals, but they're not always the most useful, and you can't always leverage them. The reason being is hashes change. If you have a file where the hash is changing daily, you're not going to want to use hash approvals. You're going to constantly be chasing yourself, constantly approving that file. That's not a good example of when to use it. It's not to say you can't. If you want to log in daily and update that hash in the console every single day, then so be it. The product will work. But that's not, from an admin perspective, that wouldn't be the good situation for it. Hash approval is good when the hash is consistent across your environment. It doesn't change, or it doesn't change often, and you can improve it and forget about it. Policy permission rules are a little trickier. This is where and actually I should have wrote fourth preferred approach there. I just realized I have a typo. So policy permission rules are the last thing you should leverage. This is when all else has failed. When you have tried certificate of approval, file might not be signed. Try to use IT tools. It might not be dropped by another file. It might just exist. You might download it. You might be the original source of the file. You don't have a way of approving it via IT tools. The hash constantly changes. You're left with nothing but policy permission rules. So with policy permission rules, you want to be careful because you can, and it is very tempting to just throw the book at it, do a full bypass and ignore it. That is not the method you should take. You definitely should always try the least intrusive approach first. So typically in the event details, when you get the block, going back to those techniques, the TTPs, we will typically see a TTP that associates with some type of policy action or operation attempt as we describe them in the console. We'll typically see an injects code or an executed a fileless script, might have invoked a command interpreter, another untrusted process. It typically will spell out why our sensor invoked a policy action on that file. Using that information is what you should craft your rule around. If the policy block became and invoked another application, don't come in here and give it a full bypass. Come in here and give it an allow or an allow and log under the invokes a unknown app or injects code, whatever the operation attempt may be. Always start with those specific operation attempts first. Work your way out. I see too many environments where I jump in and every single policy rule is a full bypass. This typically is a sign that they're not attempting to leverage the actual specific operation attempts, and they're just doing the easy answer. What you're doing by this is creating extra large gaps in your environment for no reason. Typically, you can slim those rules down to specific operation attempts. But let's discuss what happens if you try those operation attempts. Let's say the block happens because it executed code from memory. So you say, okay, Cory, I came in here, I listed the application, spelled all the path out right, used my wildcards properly, and I told it to allow and log whenever it executes code, and it's still blocked. At that point, you want to double check the new block, make sure there's not a new technique or TTP assigned to it, make sure it's not suddenly blocking because of another reason. And if it is not, at that point, you would want to move to one of the bypasses. At first, you should always try the API bypass at first. The API bypass is allowing about, I'd say, a third to half of the amount of stuff as the full bypass. At the end of this presentation, and one of the helpful links is actually a support document that will fully explain the differences between API bypass and full bypass, as a really neat little matrix chart on it that quickly shows you the differences between them. So if you've worked through the operation attempts, none of them are working for you, you're still getting blocks. At that point, try the API bypass. If that doesn't work, then and only then should you be moving to do the full bypass. Again, it should be your absolute last approach when you go to approve a file. So with that said, I'm going to jump to something that helps make this a little more understandable. So one of my colleagues, Kurt Casey, which if any of you have gone out on the user exchange and read some documentation, chances are you're familiar with his name. I had him review this, the original document a while back, and he actually helped make me this flow chart. Every customer I've sent this seems to tell me they tend to take the flow chart, stick it somewhere nice and easy to read. They say it does help them in their admin day to day. So basically it starts out, quickly ask yourself, is the file signed? Fortunately, not every file is signed anymore, but if it is, approve that certificate. That's going to help you on most of your blocks. If it's not signed, you ask yourself, is it delivered using a secure mechanism? Again, is it an installer? Is it dropped by a specific file every time? At that point, you could leverage IT tools. If not, is it a consistent hash? If yes, hash approval. And if not, that's where we jump into the policy rules. Can you identify a specific action? If yes, do an operation attempt. If not, do an API bypass. That doesn't work. You end up at the full bypass. Then we jump. I have those 3 useful documents for everybody. Again, the reputation priority chart. So this is that chart from the very beginning that has the 11 reputations and their definitions. Then we have the API versus full bypass differences. This is good to know. Again, this is just a small matrix chart that explains what they do. Order of operations, the PDF version. We just had it posted out to the user exchange last night. So that will be a link to the PDF version of this, this discussion. And then on the next side, I believe Elizabeth will jump on.
Thanks, Cory. That was great. And we have a lot of questions, so I'll try to get through this quickly. We are on track to have our second in this new series of office hours on April 19th. It will be at 8 a.m. Pacific time. I'll let you do the math for your own time zone. And John Nelson will be speaking on audit and remediation best practices. I think you've probably remembered John. He is someone who has spoken on office hours before. He also is active on user exchange, and I am really personally looking forward to his talk. And now we'll go into the next slide. Oh, one other comment. I almost forgot the most important part. The Regio page is not yet up. We'll be letting you know when you can, or you can just go on to the Regio and check, but it's not yet up. Okay, and there is a feedback survey, and please let us know what topics are interesting to you, because we can then start scheduling those for future sessions. And now I think we are heading into Q&A. Is that? Yeah, okay. So there have been a couple of questions posed in chat, and there is one in Q&A.
Yeah, I just got them all up here. I'll go ahead.
So Siva was very, very active very early on. So let's tackle Siva's questions. Can you see those?
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely. So the first question up is, how frequently do the certs and IT tool reputations get pulled down to the sensor? So they're not, that action isn't specific to the sensor. We'll just talk generically about how the sensor checks in. So by design, the sensor will check in every 60 seconds to the console and just go, hey, what's new? On the next check-in, it will receive everything new. This may be a little confusing for you as admins. You might be sitting here saying, but Cory, I only see them update every 5 minutes in the console. That's because the console side of things only updates every 5 minutes, but your sensor as an individual endpoint that is checking in every 60 seconds for those changes. You typically will see them pulled down in 1 to 2 check-ins. The next question, can PS1 files be placed for IT tools? That is actually a great question. I know I've seen it done, but I forget if it works off the top of my head, but it goes into your next question, what can go in the application as pass? Any executable, anything that we treat as an executable. So anything that executes. Log files and such would not work. You would need it to be an actual, like an exe, DLL, such as you listed. Let's see what else we've got. Dave's question. Adobe updates are one of the most annoying, and yes, they are. I've worked with customers on this. The check process is to see if it's running. The best way to prevent those common blocks. If they're still signed, I've gotten away with that in some environments. The certificate of approval should get you around those, but we're seeing less and less things signed. IT tools you could leverage. You'd want to find the main file that drops everything and list that as the IT tool itself. That should fall down. You'll want to include the child process, that little checkbox, but that should pass that local white reputation down the chain and allow the file to run. Unfortunately, for a question like that, it does get specific to the environment, because I can talk about what I would do with the default policies and assuming your block's happening because of the default policies, but ultimately you can configure the policies in such a way that your block's being created by something you've done. That's not to say it's incorrect. It's just to say that I'm not able to predict that and see that and be able to give you an answer specific to your environment. Though I will tell you all for the 20 or something, 30 something of you that are on, my boss will probably hate me saying this if he's on here. If you talk to your customer success managers and you would like help looking at your rules and getting them reviewed, just ask them for help from, just tell them that. Just say you would like a rule review and they will go through the processes. You may end up with my team and we can jump in and take a look at things like that for you, give you our input. And I think that was all our questions. I do encourage if you guys have any last minute ones, especially around IT tools. Not a problem on the questions. Q&A, the chat, it's all the same window for me. I'll let Elizabeth answer where you can get the slides.
I believe we're sending them out. Annette, is that true? I believe that
Yes, once you exit the webinar, there'll be a feedback survey. And if you need a copy of today's presentation, along with a recording of today's office hours, just please enter your email address in the survey and we will get those out to you.
Thank you.
And again, for those asking about the slides, I'll push you. I wrote the slide deck very, very simple and straightforward, just to try and keep me on topic. I could talk about this for hours. So if you are looking for that info, I would encourage you to go look at the PDF linked at the end of the slideshow deck. That is the full PDF version of this discussion. That has all the information I went over typed out. So if you forget something I said or you're looking for a specific detail, chances are it's actually spelled out in that.
And Annette has posted those links in chat so that you can go in there. I'm just saying that because if we send it out as a PDF, you're not going to be able to access the link. So if you're interested in that information, go ahead and grab those links right now, and maybe we can make sure to include those with what we send out to you.
We got a couple more questions. Let's see. Purchased Carbon Black via Dell VMware. Dell support was not good. Had to escalate to VMware Carbon Black assistance more quickly. So funny enough, I was actually on our support team for 5 years. I started our tier 1 support team. If you ever called in during the earlier years of Bit9 Carbon Black, chances are you spoke to me. My tip for you there would be 2 parts. Support will typically request a bunch of information at first. If you want the ticket to move as quick as possible, supplying all that information will definitely help. There's usually a lot of back and forth early on for that. But again, that's an obvious one. For what you can actually do, if you have a big issue and it's not being answered, you're stuck, you need help quickly. The severity of the ticket's pretty important. That does set off alarm bells in support. And if you're stuck and you're truly not going anywhere, reaching out to your customer success manager, they have buttons they can push to try and get support assistance a little quicker. So I'd push you into doing that. Just reach out to your customer success manager, have your case number ready for them, and just say, hey, this case number I'm not getting any traction on. Can you help? And they can go about. There's a couple of internal processes for that. Let's see, if we don't check the all child process box for IT tools, does it use local white only for the first child? So we'll actually not provide any local white reputation or any reputation to any of the child processes. It will only be the child files. You have to check that box off for it to do any of the processes. And then Windows and Mac, what's the best method to block Tor integrated browsers? Ooh, that is a tough one. I think I'm going to quickly search on my side window right here. I think Towton put out a post for that, if I remember. I'm going to try to log in quickly and tell you. I know we had a customer ask about that a few weeks ago. I think we pointed them towards Tau. Oh, actually, I can search. have that answer for you in just a moment. Keep a spreadsheet with all the Tautin rules in it. Now I got all the rotor encryptor. I could have sworn there was. So with the browsers, it would be tough. I know we've always been around that. For blocking it, there's two different methods. So for blocking, you want to do the opposite of all the best practices for approving. When you approve a file, you want to be as specific as possible. You want to use as minimal wildcards as possible. You want to include as much of the full path as possible. For blocking something like this, you want to be as broad as possible and you want to cover as many bases. So typically for permission rules, I'll tell you no leading wildcards. Well, I'm sorry, no leading double wildcards, and stay away from the trailing double wildcards as much as possible. In blocking rules, you want to do the opposite. So for this, I would throw the book at it. I would do a policy block around a double wildcard with the variations that the browser can live in. Typically, there will be a couple of different folders you can typically see it live in. Could also be part of the file name. You can get a little bit creative with the blocking rules. And also I would push you, if you're going to create any broad rules like that, to try and block it. Like for instance, you were to do */brave/***, that could block other unintended applications, which is where I would urge you to use our test rule functionality before you actually push it out to your production environment. Make sure it's not going to cause any issues in your environment. Great questions, though. I love them. We still have plenty of time. You can keep them coming. And I mean, I've still got 20 minutes left of my calendar. So if you guys want to keep asking some, even if they're slightly outside the box, I have no problem with it.
So I'm going to ask one, Cory.
Absolutely.
What is your most commonly asked situation or scenario where you'd be using all of these wonderful tools?
Just day-to-day admin, really. I see, trying to think about specific scenarios without getting too specific. Developers being blocked in early environments is a big one where we see a lot of the different approval mechanisms leveraged, different policies being created. New environments can definitely be tricky. And if you do any kind of in-house development, that gets even more complicated. Making it so you're not creating a complete hole in your environment just so they can work day to day and develop, but also making so you're not interrupting their day with performance or blocks. It's definitely a tricky balancing act. That is where we typically will see the variety of approval mechanisms leveraged.
Okay.
Developers can definitely be tricky, and you do have to create some kind of gap at some point. Just because they're creating new files constantly, that hashes never have going to existed. You can't predict it. It can be a little tricky creating a secure environment for them to work. And that's where make sure the IT tools, some very specifically crafted and access maintained folders that they work out of, basically not relying just on our product for developers is a big one. Making sure you have access controls all set up properly and beyond just relying on a next-gen AV.
Okay, thank you. We've got a few more questions.
Order operations consistent across app control versions. App control has a lot more mechanisms available to it. I don't think a document like this lives at this point for app control, just because it would probably be a couple hundred pages long, just thinking off the top of my head. There's a lot of nuances to app control, when to use what rule. That can be I would love to see something like this live for that. I don't think I would be the person to write it. I can think of a few in my head who could, but again, it'd be such a long document. I don't know if they would ever want to tackle that. Let's see, do AV signature pack contain known bad only or include good reputation data too? Oh, that's actually a good question. I believe it's a mixture. I believe it's just the full signature pack for all the hashes. But to back it up a little, that AV signature pack is just for the AV scanner side of the sensor. That's not the cloud reputation. That's a completely separate portion. Whenever I talk to my customers, especially new customers, to explain to them the different mechanisms of the sensor, I usually explain that the AV scanner is a very small piece of the puzzle. That's just I don't even like the term backbone. It's just a very tiny piece, so we have that AV signature portion, so we can get that quick hash-based reputation to start our investigation at. It doesn't end there. It very quickly starts there. And yes, there will be a recording of the session available. And
Yeah,
let's.
at the end, you'll be asked to provide your email if you would like that sent to you.
Oh, and actually, that's a great question. Jay Troutman just asked, for older environments, is there a method to check for unused rule or certs for cleanup purposes? That's actually very intriguing. So I haven't worked with very many older environments. Typically, I'm seeing newer customers or customers that have just gone through some kind of admin change. So I don't deal with a ton of older. So cleanup's definitely not a question we've dealt with, but that is fascinating. So no, there's no built-in method for it. But I'm trying to formulate an answer for you. So first, I'll tackle the cert side. I wouldn't worry about the certificates so much. Chances are they're outdated, and that's not impacting your sensor much at all. You can do certificate approvals for days. I'm sure that at some point you could create a certain number of them, probably in the thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, where you might see a performance impact eventually, just from the sheer amount of them. But the policy rules, there's no magic number for the limit of policy rules. And in fact, in theory, there actually is no limit. You could create as many policy rules as you want, but eventually your sensors will start to bog down because they have to chew through that rule list every time something executes. So there is a balancing act there. So for cleanup of rules, that is definitely something that I would encourage, and actually do encourage my customers to do. There's no built-in method. The ideology that I typically try to help my customers develop and move forward with is whenever we do an engagement for a customer, we do a rule review, which basically is a spreadsheet with all the rules out of your policy, with little comments next to them, and a color grading system. Green for this is syntactically correct. We'll do orange for this might be able to be written a little bit better, and we do red for this really isn't a good idea. So from that spreadsheet, we tell our customers to keep this spreadsheet, add all your new rules to it, and keep the notes up to date as to why you have the rules. So a year from now, I can come to you, look at your rule list and go, why do you have that? And you can answer very quickly, I have this for this software or for this department or for this user, whatever the reason may be. You're able to answer that question. If you were to do something of that sort, document all the rules in your environment, come up with a reason for each of the rules, why you have them, I think you'd be able to start cleaning it up yourself naturally, because you would just realize, hey, I have 10 rules for this one department. They're all really similar. Probably only need one or two of these. So I'd push you. There's no, to answer your question again directly, there's no default built-in method for that. And again, I wouldn't worry about the cert so much, but for the rules, I would try to come up with an internal process for that. Spreadsheet seems to be the easiest. So PDF Office files showing themselves as not listed reputation. So that is definitely one of the things. In accounting company or accounting departments, I should say, those Excel files can get quite tricky, especially when they have a lot of plugins and formulas running and such. So for policy setting for those, typically we'll only see those blocked, or I've seen them blocked from an unknown invokes another unknown. So the core Excel application is not approved in the environment. Adding the hash, not adding the hash, adding the certificate should get you by those blocks. But but I'm actually going to take a step back. Are you actually seeing blocks, or are you just getting events or alerts at that? Typically, we'll see a lot of alerts, not blocks. And at that point, that's where you'll want to get into the alert cleanup, where you'll want to dismiss that alert with persistence. That way you don't see that alert again. What that's doing is telling the sensor to ignore that specific threat ID, which is different from your alert ID. It will tell the sensor to ignore that specific threat ID and never display it in the console again, unless you go back and undismiss that alert. And to talk a little about what that threat ID is, every unique block or alert in your environment gets its own alert ID. Those alert IDs get tagged to a threat ID that can actually be viewed in the URL of the link when you're looking at the alert. I believe it's actually in the console somewhere now too. That threat ID is a culmination of alerts that are all identical. So when you dismiss with persistence, you're dismissing that threat ID. So any new alert that tags itself onto that threat ID will get dismissed automatically. So it'd be multi-part answer there. It'd be partial approving the certificate and partial it's likely just alert cleanup you're more worried about there. And these are great questions. As mentioned, guys, I've been here for a long time, 7 years. I've been living, breathing this product for a very long time. So if you have questions, you found the person to ask them. I might have exhausted everybody.
So I'm thinking at this point that people know your name, Cory, and that, yes, we've had a lot of really great questions, but perhaps it is time to wrap up this session. I want to thank everyone for joining. We're excited to be running office hours again for you. A reminder that if you are interested in getting the presentation, please take the survey and provide your email. Our next session will be April 19th at 8 a.m. Pacific time, and John Nelson will be speaking on audit and remediation. And with that, I want to thank our speaker, Cory Fanion, for his very, very well-prepared and documented talk today. And thank you all for your questions. And with that, I hope you have a good day.
Thank you all.